do a usury and Arabs will not do it. And it also, in a modern sense, when the world turns to capitalism, and the Arab world will actually kind of be left behind here because modern banking requires capital. It requires huge amounts of capital. And of course, a bank is going to want interest back on that. So in a modern world, the Arab world is actually kind of hindered in this, kind of hamstrung by this rule against no usury. He also, no gambling for them. He does talk about heaven. This will be a huge attraction as he's pulling converts toward Islam. His description of heaven is quite vivid. I'm not going to ask you on the test to repeat these parts of heaven, except that he does describe heaven. This will be a huge appeal to Muslims. He describes it with couches, lying on couches, and you will be dressed in silk, and you'll have milk to drink, and you'll have servants serving you in heaven. And wine. Alcohol is illegal until you go to heaven, in which case you'll have wine. And he describes it that you will not have hangovers. All the wine you want to drink will be there without any ill effects. You'll have fruit to eat. You'll have plenty of birds to eat. And he does mention the virgins. The virgins will be there to serve you with their bright eyes. Bright-eyed virgins there for you. And water flowing. Water. There will be plenty of water and plenty of shade in heaven. I found that to be quite interesting. We're talking about Mecca here. We're talking about the Saudi Peninsula where it's very hot and sunny. So, Arabic, by the way, is written from right to left, the same as Hebrew, but the characters are obviously very different. He also describes hell. He will have a vivid description of hell with scorching fire. You'll be broiled, and you'll be drinking water, but it'll be boiling water. And you'll be eating dry thorns and thistles that will make your mouth dry, and the water won't help you. You'll wear garments of fire. Boiling water will dissolve your skin and your bowels. You'll be beaten with iron rods, and you'll try to get out, but you'll be dragged back in constantly. So very vivid descriptions of heaven and of hell. Now let's talk about Mecca here. What's happening in Mecca as he's presenting this new religion, this new comprehension of God and Allah. Mecca is a great trading center. I showed you the map earlier with all the trading roads spreading out from Mecca. So even before Muhammad, it is a huge trading center. In fact, it's a holy city. The Arab people see this as a holy city even before Muhammad. Their religion, the religion of the Arab people in this area before Muhammad, is one that we say is pretty primitive. We call it animistic. Religion style of animism, which is basically nature worship, the idea that everything in nature has a spirit to it. The water, the clouds, the plants, everything has a spirit to it. So it won't be too much of a jump to Islam, the idea of a God that is in everything. Everything is part of Allah, which is a step from animism. In the holy city of Mecca, there is a holy shrine. It's still there. It's called the Kaaba, this holy location in the middle of Mecca. And in this, there is a black stone. They will say that this is where heaven and earth are connected through this stone. It's a meteorite. We believe it's a meteorite, and so it actually did come from the heavens. At this time, before Muhammad, there were tribal idols. The city, all the tribes around the city would come to the city and worship their particular idol. So there are lots of idols around the Kaaba. So Muhammad brings this new revelation, and he converts his wife, his family, his friends, and it was going pretty well. And then certain elements of the city reacted against this. The city was a center of religion, not this religion. And in 622, he and his followers are actually driven out of the city by force and anger and killing, driven out of the city, and they will head north, 240 miles through the desert, through the hot desert, with people chasing them, 240 miles up to the city of Yathrib. And this journey was quite hazardous, quite a trying period. People falling out and dying, and the religion could have disappeared right there. And instead, the journey will be called the Hegira, because this will be the start, actually, of the Muslim calendar. Yathrib will welcome him and his followers. Yathrib will become known as Medina, which means the city of the prophet. This is the first city that becomes completely Muslim, and completely dedicated to Muhammad. It's not Mecca, it's the city of Medina now that is his central location. Here it is, here's Mecca right here, and then 240 miles to the north, the city of Medina. Kind of shows you how big the Arab Peninsula is, that's 240 miles from there to there. It's a gigantic peninsula. And so Medina becomes his first capital city. By the way, the mosques, these holy sites, will have these towers here. The prayer call, someone will walk up this tower and issue the prayer call for the prayers, the 5 prayers each day. Nowadays it's done with loudspeakers, but back in the old days they had to climb these towers, these minarets. So his first success is in Medina, not in Mecca. Now what happens in the city is really important. He will convert the Arabs, they're the people who live in the city, and then outside the city are the Bedouins, these nomadic people outside the city, and they convert to Islam also. This gives him a city population. It gives him kind of a more rural population. These Bedouins are nomadic, so they know their way around, they know how to survive, and they're also great warriors. In fact, they'll become his warrior leaders. The Arabs will provide his army, and the Bedouins will provide his generals, his leadership. Inside the city, the government is the religion. Religion and government will become one. When everyone's a Muslim, there's actually no need for government. You know, an eye for an eye will be the justice system, and the social welfare system will keep everybody from starving. So government and religion should be very simplistic if everyone is on the same page. The army that he builds, as these Arabs join his movement, and they'll provide the soldiers, a very strong military of these dedicated warriors. He issues the idea of a jihad, the idea that if you go to war against his infidels, this is a holy war, that God wants this, Allah wants this, to wage war against the infidels. And he issues the idea of a promise of heaven. If you go to war to spread Islam, to spread this religion, there's the promise of heaven for you. And you might hear about this today, jihadis, modern jihadis, believing that if they attack the West or non-dedicated Muslims, that they have the promise of heaven waiting for them. Still around today. And his first war will actually be to the south, back toward Mecca, the 240 miles back to Mecca, and he will conquer the city with his Arab armies and his Bedouin leadership. It's a tough fight, but he's able to recapture Mecca. Now, the word jihad, in its ancient sense, is a war. There's no doubt about it. It is warfare. But in a modern sense, if you talk to Muslims today, in a modern sense, the word jihad doesn't mean actual combat, actual killing. The word jihad in the modern definition should be just a personal battle, a battle to be a better Muslim. There's no need for killing anymore. So this is something we hope all Muslims would accept this modern definition, but occasionally if you hear about Muslim terrorist or extreme Arab terrorism or Islamic terrorism, they would be referring back to the old way, the original war and the promise of heaven. It's Islam kind of caught in a problem with this right now. This is Mecca. As he recaptures the city, this is the Kaaba here, this original holy site. It'll be holy to him. When he comes into the city, he will have the idols destroyed. And the stone is still there, that meteorite is still there, but this will become the holy center, and the Muslims will come into the city and circle around the Kaaba in this huge ceremony. Again, all Muslims are supposed to do this at some point. It's a huge event, the journey to Mecca. On one of the corners of the Kaaba is the stone. You can actually, they've opened a hole here to it. You can actually touch it, Muslim. Only Muslims are allowed here. And the Muslims can actually touch the stone there. It believes it has some kind of power to it. We believe it's a meteorite. And then he dies. Muhammad dies. The death of Muhammad, 632. It's actually right after he recaptured Mecca. He doesn't live much long after that. He recaptured Mecca, and then he died. All right, so what do Muslims do now? Well, they continue the jihad, the idea that what has Muhammad done? Well, last we saw he was waging a jihad, and they will continue this idea. The jihad will continue in all directions. Out of Mecca, along all those roads, armies will scatter and striving for the way of Allah, spreading the religion in all directions out of Mecca, and it's going to be really successful. Led by Bedouin generals with this idea of war, and they know the way, they know how to survive in the desert, and then just a series of good generals. I mean, timing is everything, and they just happen to have some really great warriors here as Muhammad dies, and the religion will spread like wildfire. Nothing's ever moved like this before, this idea of these warriors spreading the religion, and the idea that of promise of heaven, they will march into warfare with a smile on their face, thinking that if they die, they get automatic trip to heaven. It's very, motivating. This will be the most motivated army anyone's ever seen. No one's ever seen an army march into combat with a smile on their face, with this belief of a religious belief behind it. Also, to the north, as some of the armies move to the north, there happens to be a power vacuum there to the north of Mecca. As you move toward the Mediterranean Sea, you'll run into the old Roman Empire. Well, now it's under the Byzantines, and they've been battling the Sassanids. You've got a war here between Byzantines and Sassanids that's been waging for many years, since the time of Justinian, and these people have just been killing themselves. And then from the south come the Muslims into this power vacuum with their bugles and their cavalry and their dedicated soldiers up into the Mediterranean area, where the two empires have been crushing each other. And this rapid advance of Islam in all directions. Now, Muhammad died in 632, and I just want to do this real quickly. I'm just going to jump. The date you need to remember is 632, but watch how fast this religion moves with these warrior armies, religious warrior armies moving this religion. By 637, 5 years after his death, Muslims have captured Jerusalem. 2 years later, they're into Damascus. They capture Syria. 2 years after that, they've defeated the Sassanid Empire. The Sassanid Empire is no more. The Persian, the Neo-Persian Empire is gone. They've moved into Mesopotamia and Persepolis and Susa. By 650, they're into Egypt. They cross the Sinai into Egypt. Now, this gives them a navy. Egypt has always had a powerful navy, and so now they get it. Muslims have ships now and can sail. And one of the places they sail to is for Constantinople. By 673, Muhammad died in 632, so that's within 40 years. Within 40 years after his death, they are sieging the city of Constantinople. This could be the end of the Byzantine Empire. It isn't. Constantinople will survive this, but for 4 years, the Muslims were at the gates. By 695, they've marched across North Africa, through Libya, and into modern Tunisia. And the ancient city of Carthage will become a Muslim city. They'll defeat the Vandals, what's left of the Vandals there, and make Carthage into a Muslim city, and then they keep going. Here's a map of the spread of Islam from Mecca here in all directions. To the south along the coast of Africa, to the west along the north coast of Africa, to the east all the way to India, where they'll run into the Indians here with Hinduism, and they'll be stopped right there. They'll jump across and then jump over to Indonesia. And then what will really strike fear into Christians is their move toward Europe. They'll be moving toward Europe through Asia Minor, and also all the way over to Spain, across North Africa into Spain. So they seem unstoppable. And then the problems set in. The problems are that their armies, in scattering in all directions, that's kind of taking away their power. As they get further and further from the center, the armies are diverging and becoming a little bit weaker. And a question of leadership. You know, who's in charge here? Occasionally a decision needs to be made, and who's the guy making the decision? You know, you've got all these armies in all directions, and sometimes they don't cooperate now that they're separated from each other. And the question comes up of overall leadership. Who's in charge of the religion itself? Who makes religious decisions? That's maybe people are having questions about religion. Well, who answers that question? And the answer is going to be a caliph. The religion has a caliph, a leader of the religion, an overall leader. And the first caliph, upon Muhammad's death, is handed to his father-in-law. Muhammad, again, having several wives. One of his wife's father, this is his father-in-law, a guy named Abu Bakr. I will not ask you to identify this guy's name, but watch what happens here. Watch what happens with the leadership of Islam. The first caliph is of the family, directly related to Muhammad by marriage. This Abu Bakr had been an early disciple, converted to Islam, and he becomes a leader, and then he dies 2 years later. So the first leader is of the family, doesn't last long. The second caliph, a guy named Omar, will be there for 10 years. Omar was a disciple, so they've handed leadership over to just a disciple now, someone who knew Muhammad, someone who was an early follower of Islam. And then the caliph lines continue. The third caliph, a guy named Uthman, an early disciple. So this will be the same thing. So we have two disciples now, from a family member to a disciple to a disciple. And then the fourth caliph, we're back to the family. Ali, the fourth caliph, was the husband of Muhammad's daughter. Muhammad had a daughter named Fatima, and this is her husband, and he is going to take charge of the religion as the fourth caliph. So he is a religious man, but of the family. So this is the problem with Islam. You had a member of the family, then you had a disciple, then a disciple, and now we're back to the family again. And this is where the problem is really going to take place, because there's going to be a civil war. A civil war is going to break out over the leadership of, do we need a secular leader, someone who's leading the armies, or someone of Muhammad's family? And there's going to be a fight here. The man who steps up to oppose Ali is a guy named Muawiyah of the Umayyad family. Again, I'm not going to ask you a test question about that, except that he is a general. He's leading armies, and he's looking back at Mecca and saying, well, this guy is of the family, but I should be the leader. I'm leading armies and making progress here. This guy is there because he is related to Muhammad. And this is the civil war, family versus secular leadership. Ali will be murdered in this civil war, and Muawiyah will be the winner. He will be the winner, and his line will continue into the 700s as a line of caliphs. And so this seems to be the majority. The civil war is done, and the caliphs fall to these warrior generals, and they continue the jihads.